We are going to start with a demo of Meyda, an audio feature extraction library, which was built in part and maintained in part by one of my dear friends, Hugh Rawlinson. There you go. So I'm gonna hand you the floor. And if you have any questions for Hugh, use the Q&A tab and we'll come by at the end and we'll grill Hugh.
Hi, thanks very much, Kevin, and thanks very much, Lorna, for that great talk. I enjoyed it a lot. So I'm here to briefly tell you all about Meyda, which is an open source JavaScript audio feature extraction library that my university friends and I made longer ago than I wish to admit at university. It was 5 years ago. So Meyda is this JavaScript library that we have maintained, and at 5 years old, it's still going, and we're still maintaining it, and it's still getting use, which is great. I'll briefly explain what it does. So you may need to full screen the right-hand side window there that's displaying. Maybe it'll scale if I decrease it. Size. So you can see this little yellow arrow that's wandering about here, and the blue arrow there that's wandering about above there. And on the left-hand side, there's this little pink arrow. And these are all different statistics about the audio that is being picked up by my computer. So my computer is configured to grab audio from my microphone right now. So it's analyzing my voice at the moment because that's what it's hearing. And Meyda is the part of this setup that listens to the audio and runs some defined algorithms on the audio to try and describe the sound. So the pink arrow here represents the root mean squared of the audio, which is analogous to the volume of the audio. So you can analyze how loud a sound is. You can see the spectral centroid here, which is the yellow arrow. This will tell you about how bright the sound sounds. So you could have a really sort of dark sound like a bass guitar, for example, or a drone. It might have a lot of low frequency content and not that much high frequency content. So you might describe that as a dark sound, and it would have a lower spectral centroid, whereas sounds that have a lot more higher frequency content, so like a flute, the sound of a flute has a lot of high frequency content. You'd be able to see, you'd be able to say, oh, this is a brighter sounding instrument. It doesn't need to be about instruments. It can be about recordings of voice, recordings of ambient sound, generated audio. It's general purpose audio stuff. That said, we have some audio features that extract musical details. So you can see here the chroma bands, and this tells you, this tells you what musical notes compose the sound that you're hearing. So if I whistle a note, that sound contains usually only a very specific pitch, because a whistle is a relatively pure kind of a tone. It contains very few harmonics. So I'll just do that now. So I was whistling an F, or somewhere between an F and an F sharp there, and you can see you can see as I went down the major scale, it's able to pick up which note is being played. Meyda implements a lot of existing audio features. So we have RMS, which is volume, and we have a few of them here. I've mentioned spectral centroid before at the top. It indicates the brightness of a sound. We also have things like spectral flatness, which is about the noisiness of a sound, and the spectral roll-off, which is about when the maximum, it's about the maximum frequency that is in the audio. We didn't invent any of these audio features, just to be very clear. These are sort of academic and industry standard, general purpose algorithms and statistics that people have been using to measure audio for many years. At the time when we first implemented this, we were doing so because it wasn't available in JavaScript, really. We wanted to make these algorithms or these statistics available to JavaScript developers and web developers so that they can analyze audio without having to take the audio and pass it off to a server so that the server could do the analysis with existing implementations. Yeah, so we just tried to implement as many of these as possible, and we have links out in some cases to the algorithms. Let's see. This one about loudness there. Yeah, we have these references here to the specific implementations that we referenced when we were implementing our JavaScript versions. Our big thing that we needed to get to work was that we needed these to run in real time in JavaScript. So we needed to make sure that these were performant enough that you can run these and get the results of the analysis as quickly as possible, so that visualizations can look as if they're responding to real-time audio, which we figured out how to do. And if you're more interested in the performance side of it, we have this academic paper that we wrote and published at the Web Audio Conference in 2015, which has a lot more information about how we measured the performance and about how fast Meyda ran on a 2015 or I guess 2011 MacBook Pro at the time. So we have a lot of documentation. I worked as a developer advocate, and in that job I had to do a lot of documentation writing, and I took that to Meyda, and I tried to make sure that as much as possible we had good documentation, but we're always open for contributions. So if you are looking for a final Hacktoberfest project, if you're looking for someone else's like foreign land of other people's code, here's one of those lands. We're on GitHub. We have this Meyda is our repository. I'll paste the links in the chat afterwards. But we have a contributor's guide. We link to it from the README here. It's relatively standard, but it's worth a read through to see if you're interested to make sure that you're you see how it's done. And then we have labeled our issues here with good first issue and with documentation. I completely agree with Lorna that doc contributions are extremely valuable. So as a maintainer of a library, I already have it in my head how this library works, which means I don't have the perspective of somebody who is coming to it fresh, which is really valuable. So if you're coming to this library fresh and you're finding things difficult, or you're finding it difficult to find the reference documentation, let us know. You can file an issue, but this is also an opportunity for you to find out what the right solution is and to add that to the documentation as your Hacktoberfest pull request. We also have a lot of code-based good first issues. So one that's pretty recent is that Meyda has a CLI where someone requested that we add a command line flag for a feature that's available in the Meyda library but hasn't yet made it to the command line interface. So that's a good one that you could do. Yeah, so that's about all that I had really to talk about Meyda. Let's jump into the Q&A. How did I start this project? Yeah? Do you want to ask the questions?
I could.
Okay.
You got it. I feel like you've covered a lot of this, but yeah, no, go for it. I think we should start with the most important question. Are you ready to rumble?
Oh yes, always. At all times am I ready to rumble.
I'll let you I'll let you take the questions. You got them in front of you. Just if you could read out the questions before you could answer them, that'd be super handy.
Absolutely, happy to. Who are my docs aimed at? So this is a really important question, which you have to think about when you're writing documentation. So as a maintainer, you want whoever is using your library or whoever has an interest in using your project to be able to use your project. And there are going to be lots of different kinds of people who want to use your project. Some a little more technical, for example, some a little more familiar with like a different programming language. So they might need, more explanation in how things work in JavaScript, in my case, if they're more familiar with Python, for example. You have people who are new to development and they want to try to use your project in a sort of starter project of theirs. And having good documentation is about thinking about all of the potential different kinds of people and covering as many of them as possible, writing documentation that works for as many of them as you can. So, yeah, our docs are aimed at people who are using Meyda in all kinds of contexts here. So we have these specific, we have reference documentation here, which is generated out of the source code, and it gives you very detailed information about the particular functions and arguments that you interface with Meyda and how to directly use the Meyda to every single Meyda function. But that is relatively complex, and it's definitely not something that you'd want to read all of. Whereas if you're a developer who just wants to get something done, you can come to this section here and see the guides. So we have these 3 guides about different kinds of things you might want to do with Meyda. So if you want to do real-time audio feature extraction in the browser, this guide will show you how to do that based on a HTML5 audio tag and using web audio. If you want to do offline audio feature extraction on the command line, so say you don't want to use JavaScript at all, you just want to use Meyda to get the audio features from an audio file, you can do that using this tutorial. So yeah, good documentation is about covering as many different use cases that are relevant to you, as many different people that are relevant to you as possible. And we definitely try to do that. There's gaps. We can absolutely take feedback there. Okay, have you had contributors outside of the initial creator list? If so, what? If not, what would you like to see? Yes, so we have. On the homepage here, I showed this chroma bands audio feature. So that was contributed by a member of the community called Oscar Dub, I think. And we've had several other smaller contributions over the years. So we've had, fixes for small bugs or documentation corrections. We've had feature requests as well. Those are pretty good. Yeah, so we've had lots of contributions. The features, or what would I like to see? So these issues that are tagged as good first issue, these are pretty good, low-hanging fruit. So like Lorna was saying, creators or maintainers, including myself and the other people who work on Meyda, we all have a lot of stuff going on. We're pretty busy, so even though some tasks might be relatively straightforward to do, we might not have the time to do that. We might need to focus on, more complicated or domain-specific tasks, or we might just need to work on our jobs because there's a pandemic and things are complicated. So yeah, any of these things that are tagged as good first issue or documentation, if you're interested, these are good things to work on. Okay, what can be built with Meyda? So one thing that's been built with Meyda is audio visualizers. So there's an audio visualizer called Mod 5 or Mod V. I'm not sure what the pronunciation is actually. I should check that. But there's this Mod V audio visualizer for DJs. There's not a great video right now, I think, of this working, but the idea is that a DJ or a musician would plug in their audio to this visualizer and project it up on the screen while they're playing, which is pretty fun. The visuals then respond to the music that's playing. That's pretty cool. You can also use Meyda in machine learning systems. So classifying audio is difficult if you're just using the raw audio. But if you want to classify audio based on the audio features, it gets a lot more straightforward. And you can do that in the browser as well now, because TensorFlow.js is available and works in the browser, and it's backed by GPUs on browsers that support Open or WebGL, which is great. We've had some people do speech recognition, which I thought was really cool. Yeah. How did I start this project and what made me interested? So I was a student at the time. I was studying music computing at Goldsmiths, University of London. And my course mates and I were interested in audio feature extraction because it was part of our coursework. We used to do things like implementing synthesizers and audio analysis using like data analysis tools. We used to do musical instruments, audio visualization, AI musicians, music recommendations. So a lot of that has to do with audio features. And so we thought, we can use other audio feature libraries that are in, for example, C++ or Python on, server side, but we were web developers and we wanted to make these tools available to web developers. So that's really why we got started and why we were interested. Cool. And that looks like that's all the questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Hugh. How absolutely fascinating. I hope people enjoyed your demo of Meyda and getting to see some of the applications of it, the lovely documentation that you have, and feel empowered to contribute if they feel. So you were quiet until just now. What is wrong with you?
Good dog. Thank you.